We all feel inflation when we go grocery shopping. But have you ever noticed like significant price differences, even for similar products within the same store? Today, today we're diving into a study that examines this phenomenon, specifically focusing on how the post-pandemic inflation surge impacted sales and the price gap between cheap and premium brands.
Yeah.
To guide us through this complex topic, we have an expert who can connect the dots across economics, consumer behavior, and global events.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to delve into this research. It really challenges our understanding of how inflation affects pricing and reveals some surprising consequences for shoppers.
This study examined food prices from 2018 to 2024 across 10 countries using data from 91 large retailers. Could you elaborate on the specific aspects of in-store price variation that the researchers focused on?
Sure. The study zoomed in on two key areas. Temporary discounts like sales and the price differences between similar products within specific categories. For example, they compared the prices of different brands of milk within the same store. This approach allowed them to go beyond overall price increases and understand how inflation played out at a granular level.
The inflation surge following the pandemic was significant. Did retailers use discounts to raise prices during that period?
That's a great question. Interestingly, the study found that retailers didn't significantly leverage discounts to drive up prices, even though discounts were a major source of price variation before the pandemic.
So why is that? Why didn't they take advantage of, that opportunity?
Well, discounts have limitations. They can't sustain price increases over extended periods because stores can't run sales forever. Even eliminating discounts completely wouldn't have resulted in the price increases observed during the surge. It just wouldn't have been enough.
So while discounts play a role, they weren't the primary driver of price increases. What did the researchers find regarding the price differences between cheaper and premium products during the inflation surge?
This is where things get intriguing. The study uncovered a phenomenon they termed cheapflation, where prices of cheaper products rose faster than premium products. This trend was consistent across various countries, with cheaper products experiencing price jumps between 6 and 14 percentage points higher than their premium counterparts. It's really quite remarkable.
This challenges the assumption that cheaper products always remain more affordable. Does this mean switching to cheaper brands during the surge didn't benefit consumers?
Well, data from Canadian households revealed a surprising finding. Switching to cheaper brands during that period actually increased the average price paid. This counterintuitive outcome highlights the unpredictable nature of inflation's impact within specific product categories.
That's a significant finding. What factors contributed to this cheapflation phenomenon? What's going on there?
The study explored both supply and demand side explanations. On the supply side, cheaper products often rely on basic materials in global supply chains, making them vulnerable to commodity price fluctuations and disruptions. The pandemic and geopolitical events undeniably strained these supply chains, leading to price hikes.
And what about the demand side? Did consumer behavior play a role?
Absolutely. During high inflation periods, consumers facing budget constraints often turn to cheaper products. This increased relative demand for cheaper goods can drive up prices further, creating a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. This phenomenon is especially pertinent for lower-income consumers who rely heavily on these cheaper options.
So cheapflation isn't solely driven by supply chain issues. Consumer behavior during inflationary periods is a contributing factor as well. Did the researchers find that this phenomenon was specific to the inflation surge, or did it persist beyond that period? Did it continue?
Interestingly, cheapflation primarily occurred during the peak of the inflation surge and wasn't observed before or after. This suggests that it's directly linked to high inflation itself rather than just a pandemic effect. It's very specific.
So timing plays a crucial role in understanding cheapflation. It's not a constant, but rather a phenomenon linked to specific inflationary periods.
Precisely. Understanding cheapflation requires looking beyond just supply chains and considering the interplay between inflation, consumer behavior, and price adjustments within specific product categories. It's a complex issue.
This reveals a nuanced and complex picture of how prices behave during inflationary periods. How did these trends affect the overall variation of prices within stores? How did it all play out?
Traditionally, higher inflation is thought to lead to greater price dispersion across stores because some retailers adjust prices faster than others.
Okay.
This research demonstrates that this relationship isn't so straightforward when we look within specific product categories.
Hmm.
This research demonstrates that this relationship between inflation and price dispersion isn't as straightforward as we might think, especially when we narrow our focus to what's happening within specific product categories. The study found that while increased sales activity during the surge in inflation did contribute to greater price dispersion because items on sale were obviously priced lower than regularly priced items, this effect was counteracted by cheapflation.
So that means that even though sales temporarily lower prices, the fact that cheaper products were simultaneously becoming more expensive actually reduced the overall price differences we see within those categories.
Exactly. This convergence of prices within those specific categories ultimately led to decreased price dispersion.
So it's not a given that inflation will always lead to wider price gaps as we might initially assume.
It really underscores the importance of looking beyond overall inflation rates and delving into how price dynamics unfold within specific product categories. For you as a consumer, what this means is you need to be extra vigilant and pay close attention to price variations, even for similar products, all within the same store.
So does this mean we should always be going for that cheapest option?
Not necessarily. Keep in mind that switching to cheaper products might not always result in actual savings, especially if those prices are climbing faster than those of premium products. And of course, there are other factors to consider too, like quality and personal preference.
Right. It's about striking that balance between price value and what truly aligns with our individual needs.
Consumers need to be aware that price dynamics can shift quite rapidly, particularly during those periods of high inflation. This cheapflation phenomenon really prompts us to reflect on whether we've personally observed any changes in the price differences between brands at our local supermarkets.
Have we seen those cheaper options creeping closer and closer in price to those premium brands? I know I've noticed it myself, particularly with staple items like milk and eggs. It really does make you rethink your shopping habits and how we perceive value.
This deep dive into cheapflation has been really illuminating, I think. It has definitely highlighted how crucial it is to understand the complexities of pricing and consumer behavior during these inflationary periods.
We've learned that discounts aren't always some sort of sneaky tactic to mask price increases, and that switching to cheaper brands won't always guarantee savings.
The findings from the study really challenge our traditional assumptions about inflation and price dispersion. They emphasize the importance of examining what's happening at the level of individual product categories to truly grasp the impact of these economic shifts.
Cheapflation is driven by so many factors. Supply chain disruptions, shifting consumer preferences, the unique dynamics of specific product categories. And it really demonstrates that the true cost of inflation extends far beyond those broad headline numbers.
It's a good reminder that these economic forces are constantly at play, often in subtle but impactful ways, right there on the shelves of our local stores. They affect our budgets and our long-term purchasing decisions in ways we may not always realize.
As we continue to navigate this evolving economic landscape, characterized by persistent inflationary pressures, adopting a proactive and informed approach to our shopping habits is absolutely essential.
Being mindful of how this cheapflation phenomenon can potentially impact our financial well-being and influence our consumer choices is going to be paramount moving forward.
Thank you so much for lending your expertise and for guiding us through this complex but fascinating topic.
It was my pleasure to be a part of this discussion.
It's really fascinating, isn't it? This whole concept of cheapflation has been really eye-opening for me. I think it highlights how important it is for us as consumers to really dig deeper and understand the forces at play when it comes to pricing, especially during these times of high inflation.
It really challenges those assumptions we often have about how inflation works. We tend to think of it as just prices going up across the board, but this research paints a much more nuanced picture.
Exactly, and we've learned so much from this deep dive. We've seen that discounts aren't always some sort of trick to raise prices, and that opting for those cheaper brands won't necessarily save us money. The impact of inflation really does vary quite a bit depending on the specific product category we're looking at. And of course, consumer behavior plays a huge role in shaping those price dynamics.
This whole phenomenon of cheapflation, it's driven by so many factors. Supply chain disruptions obviously play a part. Then you've got those shifting consumer preferences and the unique dynamics within specific product categories. It all comes together to show us that the true cost of inflation It's so much bigger than just those headline numbers we see.
It's a really important reminder, I think, that we need to be more savvy consumers, to really pay attention to how prices are fluctuating, even for those seemingly similar products that are right next to each other on the store shelves.
Right. As we navigate this evolving economic landscape and these inflationary pressures persist, we need to be proactive. We need to be informed, and we definitely need to be adaptable in how we approach our shopping.
I completely agree. It's about being mindful of how cheapflation could impact our budgets, in the long run, and how it might even influence the choices we make as consumers.
Well, I think this has been a really productive discussion. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for guiding us through this complex and, frankly, fascinating topic. And to all of our listeners out there, keep exploring these issues and stay curious about the forces shaping our economic reality. As always, happy deep diving.